I call the honourable member Raymond Ho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to take a call on the first reading of this routine and annual bill. Although a routine and annual bill, there are a couple of important issues in relation to this legislation, not only in its content but also in its the process. As the purpose clause confirms, subordinate legislation have to be confirmed to avoid the effect of provisions lapsing or deemed to be revoked after the elapse of a certain time, unless confirmed or validated by Act of Parliament. So in terms of a process, we are dealing with a sunset provision. Most laws do not have sunset provisions and therefore remain in force definitely. Some laws do and provide that the law shall cease to have effect after a specific date unless further legislative action is taken to extend the law. A recent example in New Zealand is the Electoral Integrity Act that was passed in 1999 to discourage waka jumping in MMP parliamentary system. That amendment expired as scheduled in 2005. We have been assured that this is a relatively administrative and procedural bill, but it touches on many facets of our society. When the matters are to do with the social security benefits, New Zealand superannuation, war pensions or community levies, they are matters that of importance, and they are significant to the ongoing operation, regulation and maintenance of those industries. Having said that, one particular order which is validated and confirmed in this bill is worth mentioning. War pensions, rates of pensions, lump sum payments and allowances order 2011, which came into force on the 1st of April 2010, amends the War Pensions Act 1954 to increase the maximum levels of pensions and allowances in accordance with the all groups CPI and to implement the government's commitments or so-called commitments, shall I add, in relation to the level of veterans' pensions. But I want to reiterate what the Honourable Rick Barker said in his press release in May, that the veteran community is still awaiting the government's long overdue announcement on overhauling and updating the War Pensions Act 1954. The Law Commission reported to the government on the 1st of June 2010, making a number of recommendations to modernize the Veterans Support Scheme legislation. The Commission outlined two principles, but I want to bring the attention of the House to the second one, that is veterans who have suffered as a result of being put in harm's way as part of their service deserve to be recompensated over and above the entitlements of ordinary citizens. No New Zealanders would disagree with that. The Commission also noted that some ACC entitlements were more generous than the war pension entitlements, meaning that some veterans were treated less generously than ordinary citizens. So again, I want to reiterate what Rick Barker said, that this is unacceptable and unfair and needs to be fixed fast. Mr. Speaker, the contents of this bill deals with areas of lawmaking where Parliament has decided that it will not give the executive carte blanche in making regulations. For example, levies imposed on primary producers under the Community Levies Act 1990 and the Wines Act 2003 and so on and so forth. The bill also validates certain subordinate legislation. This is a chance for Parliament to examine the legislation for conflict with delegated legislation principles or for any other defect in the regulation in the making of it which could lead to the regulation being regarded as invalid, or to cure any such potential defect by validating provisions. These regulations and provisions, for example, the levies and so on, that are contained in this legislation need to be renewed, and they need to be applied after consideration by this House. Because at each term, it means that these provisions will get renewed scrutiny. This is a strict contrast to another bill introduced to this House last week. Echoing the concerns expressed by my learned colleague Charles Chauvel a moment ago in this House, but from a different angle. This bill, or practice of which, is better than the regulatory standards bill sponsored by Act's Rodney Hyde. Hyde's bill introduced some new ideas which are relevant to some aspects of this bill. Mr. Hyde's bill would be applied to new laws, but after existing for 10 years, it can apply to existing regulation as well. This could empower the courts to reinterpret provisions in other laws to make them consistent with the so-called principles prescribed in his bill, thus changing the original intention of a parliament when the law was enacted. So this is unconstitutional and would fail to meet the test of responsible regulatory management. To a large extent, Ms. Hyde's bill to that is redundant, and further by requiring certification by ministers and chief executives, Ms. Hyde's bill virtually changes the role of Parliament and the courts and puts CEOs in a position to politicize themselves. What I'm trying to say is that we have well-established practice and good regulatory management system to make sure laws are enacted appropriately and where necessary, subordinate legislation, namely regulations and orders, are confirmed and or validated. And this is what responsible regulatory management is all about. David McGee, in his must-read book, Parliamentary Practice in New Zealand, describes the need for such bills as being purely and simply about confirming regulations that might otherwise lapse. Those lapsed regulations are commonly brought together in a single piece of legislation, and that touches on the very issue of the speed of lawmaking. And David McKee has evidence of a dramatic reduction in the number of minutes allocated to passing each single page of legislation, identifying that a total of 12.3 minutes per page awarded in the 2002 to 2005 Parliament was the lowest amount of time recorded over the previous 50 years. What this tells us is about the quality of legislation, is about business efficacy, and about what the legislators and the government can deliver. I want to conclude my contribution by mentioning another subordinate legislation which is validated and confirmed in this bill as well. Social Security Rates of Benefits and Allowance Order 2011, which came into force on the 1st of April 2011, amongst other things, increased most benefits, pensions and allowances. I want to particularly note that under this National and Act government, there are more people on the benefit. 17,521 more people were receiving a main benefit in June 2011 than the same period of last year, an increase of 5.6%. 5,409 more people were receiving an unemployment benefit in June 2011 than June 2009, an increase of 10.6%. Unemployment benefit student hardship up 234% from June 2011. On this Thursday, Labour is going to announce its economic package, which shows that we have a vision, we have a plan, we have a very, very good alternative policies. When National was voted in November 2008, they had a huge mandate to do many things, including bold ones, which may not be popular at the moment, but will benefit New Zealand in long run. Pity the opportunities have been wasted. Thank you.
I call the honourable member